Hey, we're starting an episode today of Hot Cocoa and a Christmas Story. And if you haven't been a part of Centerpoint or maybe even some of the other churches we've been at, you know that I love telling Christmas stories. And so we're going to be telling Christmas stories this year. And every Monday we're going to be dropping a different Christmas story. And if you want to grab a cup of hot cocoa, you see a picture of Cambry down there in the corner, drinking her cup of hot cocoa. We're going to be doing our Hot Cocoa and Christmas Story. Today we're going to be doing a story that I wrote back in 2001 called The Snake, an Imposter, and a Child. Now, I'm getting old. I can't memorize stuff all the time, so I am going to be reading here. So if you see me glancing down occasionally, we're going to be doing that. But I hope that these are a way to bless you. I want to encourage you to share these with people. And before we get started, I want to remind you, like and share this post. All right. Make sure you subscribe to our channel, Centerpoint 840. We're really trying to aim for 100 people subscribing to Centerpoint 840. And so don't just like it and share it yourself, subscribe to it yourself, but find some other people, maybe at some other churches that would like and enjoy just some good old-fashioned Christmas stories. And so tonight, The Snake, an Imposter, and a Child. He thought he could keep it a secret from me, like I wouldn't find out. That's how arrogant you can get when you're at the top. And then, when I almost toppled him, knocking him off his pearly throne, he goes saying stuff like this: I wanted him to know. I removed the blinders from him. It would do him some good. Do me some good, indeed. Underestimating me. That's what I think he's doing. The reality is that I'm sure he's just torn up because I'm not his little lackey, his perfect little angel anymore. It irks him to know that I'm out on my own and I'm doing just fine. Better than fine. People love me. And he thinks that pulling a little stunt like this is going to bring him any fans. I don't think so. You see, in this business, you give the customer what he wants, or you go home empty-handed. I may not have all the niceties I had when I was working for him, but what I lack in resources, I make up in ingenuity, talent, and just plain common sense. The result is that I'm known across the globe as the only one who can take care of individual desires of each person that I do business with. I offer the world a better way, and not just a better way, but an easier way. If you mess with what he has to offer, you'll spend a lifetime just trying to figure out the instructions. Real men don't read instructions. That's my company slogan. Do you like it? I thought of it all by myself. What is the world looking for? Simple, a better way. Build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. You've seen the world. What it needs was someone to set it right. The prophets wrote of a leader, a king of kings, a prince of princes. Sounds simple enough, but find someone worthy of such a position is difficult. Humanity, in its very nature, seems destined for self-destruction. Every person who demonstrated the potential to be that leader that I needed failed in his ultimate purpose. Sure, many have done great things for me, but getting me that one decisive blow, that victory that would at last prove that I am superior, eluded me until now. My many hard years of work, my patient waiting, my tireless vigilance, and finally, the time was right. But little did I know that my mortal enemy was at that very moment plotting against me. We both know the heart of a man. Some say he knows it best, he invented it, but I improved it. He had no idea what he had created when he made it. The deep recesses, the winding passages, the closed doors. I can make it like a vault, locked up so tight. Name me a man that doesn't have something he wants to hide, keep secret. I'm the one, the only one who can help you find that extra little space that needed protection for even the dirtiest ideas. Still, the heart of a man is that of a follower. With as much time as man can waste on talk of freedom and individuality, it's amazing how easily one can shape the thoughts of millions with a word spoken by an individual at the right place and at the right time. And so I took it upon myself to fulfill the prophecies that were looked for. A mighty king? No problem. Full of wisdom? I'd make sure of it. A prince of peace? There will never be a rival to it. just, merciless justice will be his trademark. Then, and then alone, would the world be as I had envisioned it, the perfect model of my own design. But where would I find such a person to take on such lofty aspirations? Where would a human full of weaknesses that I cannot mend be found to take arms for me, to wage war in earth on my behalf? Oh, years of failure taught me much of this process. Too much arrogance and the primary objective is lost. Too little ambition and lesser victories satisfied. Too harsh with too little strength and there are revolts. Not harsh enough and revolutions occur nonetheless. Too virtuous and many become unresponsive. With every success that I appeared to develop, I would find two crevices in my plans, but patience has always been my strong suit. One failure would only lead to another opportunity, and then by accident, I stumbled upon it. Each failure began to exhibit the characteristics of the previous one. You are what you eat. What I needed to do was find leaders who would scavenge the scraps of their enemies and incorporate those ideas that were necessary to create the world, my world, that I would prepare for my leader, the one I would anoint to take over. I was surprised at how easily this began to take place. The amorous with which one nation would have towards another's success made creating that perfect cultural easier and easier. To one nation I would teach brutality, to the next strategy, the next philosophy, until finally I had woven my views of the world into every aspect of society. The Greek Empire had ambition, they had organization, they had direction. They were the last sacred cow. While the people of my enemy wallowed in poverty, dejection, and insignificance, their glory fading quickly from view. Thanks, in no little part to my workings, I had managed to unify the world. The world was primed, but the Greek leaders were not willing, or perhaps able, to take that final step to immortality. I needed someone who would respect the work that I had done these last 500 years, but someone who would also listen to me as I led him across that threshold into a new empire of power, of control, of victory. I had learned that these frail human kingdoms don't last, so I always tried to have one or two nations on the rise, even during the height of other powers. Inevitably, one would stop being useful to my cause and would need to be removed to begin the process over again. I had had my finger in many pots during the great success of my deluded Greek Empire, but there was one in particular that showed tremendous promise: Rome, a republic. My first work with such a group. It proved to be the final key in my great plan to bring once and for all into this world my order. You see, both a leader and a senate are easy enough to manipulate to my advantage. But the one big plus about having both is that I can use one to keep the other in line. And it worked. I don't want to be too modest because I am a genius. I had my Messiah, the deliverer of the world, the bearer of peace. Let the world cry out, "Hail Caesar!" Julius Caesar. He was a masterpiece. The people loved him. The world loved him. He loved himself. Every inch of Rome, every city under their control, every coin used for business would bear the image of Caesar, my anointed to rule the world. The image of leaders to come, the destiny of my vigilance, the overthrow of every work of God. Though his body was mortal, the image, the vision, the rule of Caesar I had meticulously designed to be immortal. Pax Romana would dominate the world. The world would unite, and they would unite under me, Beelzebub, the great fallen star, the prince of demons. I was created with power by God. My destiny is to replace him as God. He made the world in his vision, man in his image. Now the world was becoming my vision. It bore my image. My victory was near, and it would be complete. Majestic, regal, and powerful, the irresistible, the immovable, Rome was power. The world now spun on power. I had willed it thus to be, and so it had become. The lust for power is the greatest moving agent in the world today. Families will crumble over struggles for power. Nations will topple as leaders vie for power. Even God's own religious leaders will destroy, maim, and humiliate one another for the power to represent their faith. By the time any one of these squeezes out enough power to dominate, whatever good intentions were planned can easily be turned to my work, out of a simple desire to maintain that power. However, in the face of this juggernaut of a nation that I had carved out, rumors began spreading that my enemy was attempting to introduce his own Messiah into the world. Let him come. I had no fear. My empire had suffered its first loss, and Caesar fell at the hands of traitors. But my design to produce forever an heir to the throne would carry on. My plans succeeded without fault. The new Caesar, Caesar Augustus, was in control, and Caesar lived on and prospered. My enemy, God, could not stop my Caesar. Let his Messiah come. He would find only ruin in the path. And as usual, he was a day slow and a pound light. I had the edge, the power, the time, the people, the world, and he had nothing. A ragtag group of followers, more often unfaithful than not. Still, my enemy insisted on carrying on with his ill-conceived plans. What did he think he could gain by bringing his Messiah into the world now? Surely he saw that the world was mine. Still, I had to make Rome secure. Most certainly God would mold a bold warrior, a charismatic leader, a persuasive orator, a shrewd strategist that he would place in some country to attempt to topple my empire. My Caesars had to come down hard, had to keep vigilant watch, and had to be aware of their ever-present dangers. New garrisons were dispatched throughout my world to make sure every king, governor, prefect, and advisor was made aware of where their loyalties were to lie. Caesar declared a census to be made, a count of everyone in his kingdom. It would be much easier to root out and kill any threat if my people on earth already knew and understood who they were dealing with. Then I put the plans into action to have Caesar declared a god. How could Yahweh's leader be godly if he opposed the God of this world, Caesar? Egypt had been set straight by the destruction of Antony and Cleopatra. Persia was kept in line by a legion of my men. Israel was held in check by the menacing Herods, another family that I'm quite proud of. And the Far East still remained safely superstitious, but spiritually primed to take my message to any willing listener. However unlikely though it was that out of the East, I first began to understand my enemy's devices. My people kept in close contacts with the mystics and wise men and astrologers scattered throughout the world. But rumblings and rumors were spreading that a group of my most talented and influential workers in these mystical arts were becoming slowly unresponsive to me. Granted, these setbacks have occurred throughout time before. God chooses someone with whom he's going to work, and slowly he begins to turn those individuals from me and toward him. But I had never seen him try so many that far east and people of such power. Could it be that his king would be Asian? Change the landscape of the world with one quick strike? More investigation was needed, and that's where God Almighty faltered in his plan. His new wise men were too loose-lipped. They practically spilled God's entire plan right there to their entire nation. A king had been born in Israel. They had been alerted to this by a sign, a star in the sky, and they were on their way to anoint this king. They would never get the chance if I had my way. But what to do? I should have guessed Israel. There's no real power, no real strength in Israel, but God has always had a weakness for them. Still, that is why I have my people there. Herod won't bear this Messiah, that is certain. If he does, he'll simply dispose of them. Herod has no compunction when it comes to removing family. On a whim, he's already killed 2 of his own sons. No. God would not use Herod, but who? The wise men would know. But it would take them months to get to Jerusalem. I would not need months, but only hours to figure out what was about to happen. Within moments of learning about the wise men's discovery, my messengers and fellow demons began streaking to my presence. The enemy had been sighted, and in numbers so large they could not be counted. The initial shock and the power of their commander had been so overwhelming that not even my most vigilant servants could relate to me the message that these angels brought, only that God's Messiah had been born that night in Bethlehem. I had gone east, fearful of the wise men, while God was preparing his rival, his warrior, his Messiah, right in the bosom of my power. I myself would descend on Bethlehem that night, wholly expecting something menacing to be barring my way, but the air was clear. The enemy was nowhere to be seen. He had revealed himself, thinking we would not come, but on we came, and the might of my men swelled by the minute as we gathered strength of my demons from the Huns in China, India, and Persia, a quarter of my entire forces with my fastest gathering even more from the other great continents. I sent special messengers to the demons around Herod and his advisors. Upon their arrival, Herod and his associates would be fixated against this new king. They would be prepared to take the most drastic action, and those wise men would lead them right to this prince. I looked at the stars for the first time in 1,000 years. They had been unchanging, and I had lost interest in them, but sure enough, that star was there, a new light in the heavens. A good astrologer may have been able to discern what country that star hung over. A great one could have perhaps located an area within a few cities, but for me that star was a pinpoint screaming out, "Here is my king!" Both a challenge and an overly arrogant gesture. This new Christ would not make it through the night. The world was only able to hold one anointed, and I already had him on the most powerful throne ever. We arrived late that evening. A gathering of shepherds had begun to make their way to that same spot, the perfect opportunity. I would simply latch on to the heart of one of the shepherds, sneak in as their invited guest, and then in one blow, eternity would be satisfied. I would be God. But for whatever reasons, my hands just slipped off of the heart on which I tried to grasp. I attempted a second time, but the results were the same. I went to another, and the hearts of these men were unlike any that I had ever tried to latch on to before. Like a young child's heart that cannot be grabbed, something had so filled their hearts that they were absolutely no place for me and my men to grab onto. I unleashed my fury, first my strongest, then my quickest, then my most agile, my wisest, my bravest, my most vicious, and then all of them together. And there were no handles on these hearts. The angels in the field, the voices and songs had somehow managed to fill these simple shepherds' hearts with strength beyond reason. But no, they must not be shepherds. I would not accept that. They only feign simplicity. God must have his mighty warriors, his new king inside, and so he's placed fearsome guards and stalwart priests around this ramshackled stable to try to deceive me. I'm not some child to be toyed with. These warriors would not be used or manipulated. Therefore, they would be assaulted. I organized such a force that tales would be written about the ferocious thrashing that was placed on God's servants, his guards, and most importantly, his Messiah that night. And with blinding speed, we charged the feeble stable, penetrating its walls, doors, windows, and ceilings, simultaneously converging on the mark where the child would be guarded. Only a few of my most valiant generals and myself are even able to recollect images of what occurred as we penetrated the walls. My generals have prepared an official statement of the events that occurred that night. The entire event was a ruse, a trap, a farce designed by the enemy to destroy us. Most demons only remember the blinding light, piercing their eyes, burning their faces, and pushing them back with the force of a tidal wave. Impossible to fight against, compelling in its nature, destructive to any demon who would choose to linger in its presence. My leaders, however, properly deduced that that light was a light that we had not spoken of for centuries. It was the light and the glory of God. None of my minions would ever know that. They would be content to know that God had provided the mightiest of angels with some supernatural artifact to destroy us, and that it had gone wrong since none were destroyed, only blinded, wounded, and confused or repelled. They would feel our victory came in our ability to resist this new power of God. My generals knew that God himself, though, was in that room. And why he chose not to undo us remains a mystery to them. However, I saw what was real in that room. I saw and I knew. Not because God wanted me to know. My knowing jeopardizes everything he has planned. No, I know because I'm powerful, because I'm strong, and I will be able to resist. You see, what I saw puzzled me for many years. I recognized the light the moment we entered, that light that I once sat next to. How could I not recognize the glory of God? But what I saw that no other demon saw was where that light came from. That simple room contained a stable full of horses and donkeys and some chickens and a group of people huddled around a trough. The light revealed the true nature of everyone around that feeding bin. Shepherds, ordinary shepherds, not warriors, not priests, but shepherds whose hearts were now visibly filled with peace, with joy, with the Spirit of God. So full that my legions could not enter or even hang on to a corner of their hearts. Then there was a couple, simple, plain folk, but you could see the mark of God on them. They were off limits, special, reserved for his work. Who they were, I did not know until some time later. A simple girl and a carpenter, and out of them would come God's anointed one, his Messiah, his Christ. But their simplicity turned to majesty as I gazed down at the child, and then it hit me. The light, it nearly blinded me. It began forcing me back out of the little hut, but I saw him, the baby. He was God. Not as I had designed Caesar to be. He was actually God, immortal, invisible in the flesh. Then the prophet's words rang in my ears. Emmanuel, God with us. That was the last image I had of that night. I too was expelled from his presence into a silent night. My army could do no mischief that night. They were scattered and wounded. The enemy didn't move. They were still. And the world, for a moment, was quiet as I left that place deep in thought. It took years to reorganize my ranks. The wounded healed slowly. The blind eventually recovered, but the scars remained. My people tried to kill that baby, but he escaped, where I do not know. But he will show up again. And this time I will not be taken by surprise. Plain parents, a wrecked stable, dirty shepherds. He was trying to keep this child from my grasp. But mark my words. This child will one day worship me, or he will die. And should he somehow attempt to come to power, let there be fair warning that the people will rally to me. For I am the world's true king, the prince of this age, the snake who brought down God's paradise, the deceiver who molded an impostor into a Messiah, and victor of this child. And when he is killed, who will stand against me then? In the narrative, we had a response from an angel. It said, indeed, Satan would try to kill this child, who was named Jesus, but called the Christ. But God would protect him and his family, first by sending them off to Egypt in secrecy, then returning them to their hometown in Nazareth. The boy grew up like ordinary boys, but with extraordinary understanding, peace, grace, and faith. Satan did not stop there. He would attempt to cajole, bribe, even force concessions from Jesus as he grew. But in his wisdom, Jesus resisted, and went on to become a great rabbi, a teacher of teachers. Sadly, though, Satan did find willing accomplices throughout the region and would attempt to hinder Jesus' teachings at every step. He did not act like the Messiah that Satan expected, but rather was a model of humility and generosity. Satan worked tirelessly, nonetheless, to put down Jesus in his work and eventually was able to fulfill his ultimate desire. A corrupt religious system and a power-starved political leader conspired to crucify Jesus unjustly. But do not cry. Nothing that Satan has done in the past, nothing he did to Jesus, and nothing he does today is a mystery to God. Jesus was killed on God's schedule, not Satan's. And when Satan did orchestrate the events of Jesus' death, he unwittingly orchestrated the cause of his own downfall. You see, salvation for a hurting world entered in when Jesus gave up his life on that cross. There is a mark that you can receive that makes you off limits to Satan. It is Jesus. You see, Jesus died, but to the great distress of Satan, he rose again. And if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you too can be saved. I hope you enjoyed a little time of Christmas story. I hope you have your cup of hot cocoa ready. I want you to share it with your family and friends. I want you to know that Satan has had plans, and you can look back at this year and think, oh my goodness, Satan's plans are all over the place. But just like then, it's still true today. Jesus is all powerful. He is the King of Kings. He is the Lord of Lords. He is the Prince of Peace, the wonderful Counselor, the mighty God, and the everlasting Father. So in all the things that are happening in your life and the lives of those around you, know that God is still on his throne. And if we trust in him, that we too can have that everlasting life. God bless you all. Look forward to seeing you next week as we do another one of our stories. See you then.